Each year, search and rescue teams are called out to the U.S. wilderness to look for people who've inexplicably gone missing. Some of these mysterious disappearances served as inspiration for a series of books, written by former police officer David Paulides. Since then, the missing 411 phenomenon has taken the world by storm, as people ponder the strange events that take place in the woods and that have never been explained. The disappearance of 20-year-old Christopher Thompkins, which occurred on the 25th of January, 2002, is one that is truly strange. So much so that some people believe there's a paranormal element involved. According to Christopher's family, he was a hardworking man whose roots were firmly planted in his Christian faith. At the time that he went missing, he and his mother were living in Ellerslie, Georgia, where he worked for a construction surveying firm. At the time, he was part of a 4-man crew, and on the 25th of January of that year, he arrived for his shift at 8 a.m., after which he and a fellow crew member traveled to a wooded area close to County Line Road in Harris County to carry out some surveying work along with 2 other men. The group had established a very particular and efficient way of working, which was to remain spaced about 50 feet apart from each other, each getting on with their own part of the job. Having worked hard that morning, the group stopped to have lunch but continued working at around 1:30 p.m. The man closest to Christopher was in the middle of a conversation with him, but he briefly looked away to concentrate on his work. He merely turned his head for a few moments, but when he turned back to Christopher, he'd seemingly disappeared into thin air. This didn't immediately alarm him though, as Christopher's tools were still lying on the ground where he'd been working. He informed the other 2 men that he couldn't see Christopher, but they assumed that he'd simply gone into the tree line to relieve himself. They waited a few minutes for him to return, but when he didn't, they walked over to his area, and to their surprise, they couldn't find him anywhere. They quickly searched the surrounding area, but to no avail. They simply couldn't find any explanation for his sudden disappearance. One of the workers contacted his wife and told her what had happened. When it became apparent that something was wrong, the police were called, and Christopher was reported as missing. It wouldn't be until 4:15 that afternoon, however, that his mother was told that he had disappeared. When the police arrived, they also searched the area, and this is when things started to get very strange. One of Christopher's work boots was found hanging from a barbed wire fence, close to the spot where Christopher had been working. His coworkers immediately recognized it as his, and they also confirmed that a blue thread was found on the same fence, and it was likely from his blue work pants. Furthermore, and equally as baffling, some small change was found lying on the ground in the same spot by the fence. The scene was checked for biological material, but none was found, and neither the police nor the workers could find any evidence that Christopher had been attacked by a wild animal, or that he'd been hurt in any way. He was simply gone, and with no further clues being found, his case went cold. Strangely, a farmer who lived less than a mile from the work site contacted the police 6 months later to report that he found a boot on his property, and it was confirmed that this was also Christopher's. It's been speculated that the 3 workers who were in the woods with him that day had something to do with his disappearance, but this has never been proven, and none of the men were ever considered suspects in the case. The owner of the company told investigators that Christopher had been acting strangely in the days leading up to his disappearance, but he never explained what he meant by this statement. His mother believes that foul play is involved, but without any proof, that remains just a theory. To this day, the case continues to baffle investigators, and Christopher's fate remains unknown. The case has since been closed since the police believe that he simply walked off into the woods and started a new life somewhere else, and will likely never know what happened out in the woods that day. 67-year-old James J. Arthur, known to his friends and family as Jim, was no stranger to the outdoors when he went missing in July of 2008. He was a decorated Army veteran who loved nothing more than to take long hikes in the wilderness with his camera, and according to his family, he was in good health, making his disappearance all the more baffling. The mystery began on the 28th of July in Madera County, California, when he told members of his family that he was heading out to take some photos with his Olympus camera. He took an optical lens with him as well as his walking stick and a red backpack. There's a strong possibility that he had a firearm with him, which he would have had loaded with snake shot in case he came across a rattlesnake while he was out there. He added that he might be stopping for lunch in Big Sandy, and that he would be back home by the time the sun set. But when night fell, Jim hadn't returned as planned, and his family contacted the police to report him as missing in the Star Lakes area. A search was quickly organized, and the areas where Jim may have traveled to were thoroughly combed, but no sign of him was found. The following day, his truck was found close to the Iron Lakes Reservoir entrance on Beesore Road. When it was searched, no further clues were found, and the surrounding area didn't show any signs that a struggle had taken place. When word of Jim's disappearance started to spread, 2 witnesses came forward to report that they'd seen him on a trail that leads to Iron Lakes. When they spoke to him, he stated that he was on his way to Iron Lakes and that he'd stopped to catch his breath. The Bear Island Lake, Junction Lake, and Iron Lake Trailhead and Grizzly Lake areas were thoroughly searched in case Jim had changed his plans or gotten lost, but no sign of him was found. It's been 16 years since Jim went missing, and to this day not a single piece of his equipment, clothing, or even his backpack has been found. It's been suggested that he may have become lost and wandered further into the woods without realizing it, but since he was an experienced outdoorsman, this seems unlikely. Others feel that he may have fallen into one of the small bodies of water that can be found in the area and drowned, but this also remains just a theory, since none of his belongings have ever been found in or around the water. In these types of missing person cases, a piece of evidence such as a scrap of clothing or equipment is usually found at some point, giving investigators at least some indication of what may have happened. But in Jim's case, all we can do is speculate, since not even a single fiber of clothing was found. Morgan Elias Heimer, a 22-year-old man from Cody, Wyoming, mysteriously disappeared in June of 2015. At the time, he was studying English at the University of Wyoming, and in his spare time, he worked as a river guide for a company called Tour West that offered rafting tours in the Grand Canyon National Park. He was a keen outdoorsman, and on the 2nd of June of that year, Morgan was working as a guide for a group that had undertaken an 8-day trip down the Colorado River. They were on day 6, and up to that point, the trip had gone well, but that was about to change. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, they'd reached River Mile 213, which is situated close to Pumpkin Springs. The lead guide of the party would later tell investigators that Morgan had approached him that afternoon to discuss his plans of taking some time off later that afternoon. According to some reports, Morgan was seen by several people in the group as he stood next to a campfire that had been lit, with several other people in the party, and he was also known to be wearing a life vest. The main guide walked away from Morgan after their discussion to talk to one of the clients, who was standing nearby, and when he looked back, Morgan had inexplicably disappeared, as if into thin air. The guide assumed that he'd decided to go on his break, but when Morgan didn't return, the group started to become concerned. They searched the area where he was last seen, but couldn't find any trace of him, and at 7:26 p.m., they contacted the authorities to report him as missing. They told investigators that they'd been swimming in the river, and when Morgan failed to show up for dinner, they knew something was wrong. But searchers were hopeful that Morgan would either return on his own, since he was experienced with the outdoors, or that they would find him quickly, since he would have known that they were looking for him. The river was searched between mile markers 211 and 225, and the areas around Pumpkin Springs were also thoroughly combed through, but to no avail. When no trace of Morgan could be found, the search area was increased by 12 miles to include Diamond Creek, but again, no clues were found. The people who were on the rafting trip, employees of the rafting company, and other raft operators were all questioned in case someone saw where Morgan headed off to, but this also didn't yield any results, and investigators were left baffled. The search lasted for 6 days and covered a huge area of the park, but not a shred of evidence was found to indicate what had happened to Morgan. Since then, many theories have been put forward, including the suggestion that he may have fallen into the river and drowned, but this seems unlikely since he was a very strong swimmer. It's also possible that he'd somehow gotten lost while on his break and couldn't find his way back, but again, he was an experienced outdoorsman who was there 1 minute and gone the next, and it seems strange that he would get lost within earshot of the group that he was with. Some people have speculated that something supernatural occurred since he disappeared so suddenly, but as with all other theories in this case, it remains speculation. The last time that Morgan was seen, he was wearing a dark-colored flotation device, a blue plaid shirt, Chicago sandals, a maroon baseball hat, and brightly colored shorts. He also had a purple water bottle with him. He remains missing to this day, and his NamUs case number is MP29029. In 1969, Carl Herbert Landers was a 69-year-old man, but despite his age, he remained extremely active as he was a member of the Orinda Road Runners Club. It was at the club that he met two fellow outdoor enthusiasts, 64-year-old Milton or Milt Gaines and 60-year-old Barry Gilmore. On the 22nd of May of that year, the three men traveled to Mount Shasta, which is situated just north of Sacramento. The mountain is notorious for disappearances and other strange events that have been reported there, but despite this, Carl was determined to hike to its 14,179-foot high summit, a feat that would not easily be achieved. Carl had a lot of experience as a hiker who'd become fascinated by the mountains, and at 4 a.m. that morning, he and his fellow hikers set out with all the equipment that they'd prepared the night before. The mountain was covered in deep sections of snow, which made the going tough and slow. They ultimately decided to set up camp in an area known as 50-50, where they planned to spend the night before continuing on the next morning. But as the night went on, Carl started to complain that he wasn't feeling well. It's been suggested that his symptoms were worsened by the medication that he was taking, but when he woke up the next day, he decided to press on. Some people who are familiar with the case believe he may have been suffering from altitude sickness by this point, and that this may have affected him quite severely. Nonetheless, he set out towards Lake Helen with his friend Milt, following a short distance behind. Milt stuck to the exact trail that Carl was following, but then something truly strange happened. Milt looked up to see how Carl was progressing, and to his surprise saw a different climber walking in front of him at a very brisk pace. He could no longer see Carl, but pressed on to Lake Helen's as he was sure he would catch up to him there, but when he reached the lake, Carl was nowhere to be seen. When he couldn't be located, the authorities were informed, and a search was immediately organized since the temperatures were already dropping, making Carl's chances of surviving on the mountain on his own far less likely. The areas where Carl was last seen, as well as other large areas of the park, were searched, but bizarrely, not a single trace of him was ever found. Many hikers have since traversed the same areas that Carl was hiking in, but no part of his equipment or clothing has ever been found. Carl's disappearance is one that no one is able to explain. The fact that he remains missing decades after the fact without any indication as to what happened to him seems almost impossible, and it remains one of the most perplexing disappearances to ever take place on Mount Shasta. Carl's NamUs case number is MP95637. 84-year-old Reverend Maurice Doc Dametz disappeared in the Pike National Forest in 1981, and to this day his case remains unsolved. It's yet another missing 411 case that seems to have no explanation and that may never be solved. Maurice was known to be a rockhound, a member of the American Federation of Mineral Societies and Flatirons Gem and Mineral Club, who liked searching for strangely colored pieces of topaz. And on the 29th of April that year, he and a friend, David McSherry, headed out to the Topaz Point picnic area near Devil's Head to search for some of the minerals. At the time, he was suffering from a blood disorder and struggled to walk under his own steam. Because of this, he was always accompanied by David, who helped him get around while also searching for unique stones. The two men made it as far as Rampart Range Road, where Doc found a spot that he liked, and David found a spot about 50 yards away. They dug for topaz for about 2 hours, after which David went back to Doc and told him to start finishing up, since it was time to head back home. He then walked back to his own digging area to collect his equipment and the rocks he had found. But when he walked back to Doc's spot, he was surprised to find that he was no longer there. Just as baffling was the fact that Doc's tools were gone. Since he was already struggling to walk, his tools would have only made traversing the area harder, and David struggled to find an explanation for where Doc had gone so suddenly. He assumed that Doc somehow made his way back up the hill to the car, but when he reached the vehicle, Doc wasn't there either. He waited for a while to see if he would arrive, but when he didn't, he started honking the car horn to give his friend an idea of where to go in case he was lost. When he still didn't turn up, David contacted the authorities, and when the area where Doc was digging was checked, they found no signs that a struggle had taken place, or that he'd been attacked by a wild animal. A grid-pattern search started at 11 p.m. that night, and the search continued for a further 5 days, but Doc remained missing without any clue as to what happened to him. Search dogs were brought in, but were unable to pick up on his scent. Doc's wife, Myrtle, was understandably very distressed by this disappearance, and when no sign of her husband was found, she wrote to Governor Richard Lamb, stating that she believed something untoward had happened to Doc and that someone may have abducted him. This did little to solve the mystery, though, as no sign of Doc was ever found. It's been suggested that he walked into the woods to relieve himself before walking back to the car, and that he somehow got lost. But David was close by and would have heard Doc calling for help if he was lost. Since he struggled to walk, he could not have wandered far from the digging area, and so would have heard David honking the car horn, but he never responded or called for help. Some people feel that Doc knows more than he's letting on, and have even speculated that he may have ended Doc's life, but no evidence was ever found to support this theory. It's also been suggested that Doc knew he didn't have long to live, and hence decided to end his own life out in the wilderness. But since none of his equipment, clothing, or remains were ever found, this also seems unlikely. It's an inexplicable case with many more questions than answers, and for more than 4 decades after Doc mysteriously disappeared, we are no closer to finding out what happened to him or where he eventually ended up. Doc's nameless case number is MP23111. While most mountain ranges have seen their fair share of disappearances, the Porcupine Mountains in Wisconsin have only had one unsolved mystery: the disappearance of 19-year-old Michael Larson, who vanished there in 1968 and who was never seen again. At the time, Michael was living in Madison while he studied at the University of Wisconsin, having graduated high school 2 years earlier. On the 22nd of April, he told his mother that he was heading into town to get a haircut. He then got into his green Volkswagen sedan and headed out. It was later discovered that he may have had other plans, since he also took a poncho and a map of the Porcupine Mountains Wilderness State Park with him. Soon after leaving the house, he withdrew $650 from his bank account for reasons unknown. He never came home that night, and when he still hadn't contacted any of his friends or family 2 days later, his parents reported him as missing. His car had been discovered by a conservation officer in an area known as the Porkies, and the officer found it strange that it was parked in a remote area near a gravel pit. Even more baffling was the fact that the license plate was missing, and that the keys were left in the ignition with a full tank of gas. His mother would later tell investigators that he'd been looking forward to the new college semester since he was a top student. She added that he didn't have any medical issues or physical problems. He was well liked by everyone who knew him and didn't have any romantic issues. While he wasn't an experienced outdoorsman, he knew how to read a map and a compass, making his disappearance all the more strange. He'd been out in the Porkies on many occasions, since he and one of his brothers, Tom, enjoyed spending time there on occasion. 7 months went by without any trace of Michael being found, and investigators appealed to hunters and fishermen in the area to be on the lookout for him. As soon as deer season started, the first clue was finally found. A hunter reported finding a shoe with the human foot still inside. The area where the boot was found was searched the next day, resulting in another boot in the same condition being found about 50 yards from the first. It was noted that each of the boots had what looked like bear bite marks on them. Given that DNA technology didn't exist at the time, it could only be determined that the remains belonged to a male over 17 years of age, and it remains unknown whether the boots belonged to Michael. The remains have since gone missing, and so modern technology can't be used to determine whether they belong to the missing man. Search dogs were unable to find any trace of Michael, and none of his clothing or equipment other than his shoes was ever found. Some people have speculated that he may have gone into the wilderness to end his own life, but his family doubts this since he seemed happy and seemingly didn't have any reason to do so. The area where the discovery was found was thoroughly searched with the use of police dogs, but even they couldn't find any further clues, and Michael's disappearance remains as inexplicable today as it did so many decades ago. Michael is described by his family as 6 feet tall, weighing around 170 pounds with brown hair and blue eyes. At the time he disappeared, he was wearing green pants and a black sweatshirt, neither of which were ever recovered. Samantha Sayers, known to her friends as Sam, has been missing for 6 years, and her family is hopeful that she will one day be found, despite the investigation into her disappearance having come to a halt. While still in high school, Sam was diagnosed with alopecia, a condition that occurs when the body's immune system starts attacking a person's hair follicles, resulting in their hair falling out. Following her diagnosis, she started wearing wigs, but found them to be uncomfortable, and hence she preferred to shave her head instead. After graduating from high school, she attended the State University of New York in Fredonia, and in 2013 she graduated. She was eventually adopted by her stepfather, and in 2009 changed her last name from Steinbach to Sayers. She was known to have a love for the outdoors and often went on hikes in the wilderness, specifically at Vesper Peak, which is located about 90 minutes from the family's house. She was in a committed relationship with 33-year-old Kevin Dares and worked as an Airbnb cleaner in King County, Seattle. On the 30th of July, 2018, Sam asked several of her friends if they wanted to accompany her to Vesper Park for a hike, but no one was interested and Kevin was working, so she decided to head out on her own, as she'd done on several occasions in the past. In a post that she made to one of her social media accounts, she mentioned that the hike was not suitable for beginners and that she would be setting out early in the morning. She added that she was planning to be home at around 6 or 7 p.m., depending on how fast she could finish the hike. She left her and Kevin's apartment at around 8 a.m. on the 1st of August, after which Kevin messaged her, reminding her to be careful and to immediately contact him if anything went wrong. She replied to the text saying she would do so. Kevin later told investigators that she was wearing a maroon jacket, gray yoga leggings, and a pair of hiking boots when she left that morning. She also took 2 hiking poles, a tan-colored hat, and either a black or blue backpack with her. The trail register at Sunrise Mine Trailhead shows that she signed in at 10:30 a.m. before starting on her hike. She was seen by several other hikers out on the trail that day, who recalled that she'd removed her shirt. She stated that they were certain it was Sam since she didn't have any hair. It's known that she made it all the way to the summit after traversing some challenging terrain, since one witness saw her there between 2 and 3 p.m. They added that she'd sat down and was in the process of eating a sandwich. She also spoke to several other people who were hiking the trail and was seen watching a group of rock climbers who were a short distance away. When she didn't return to the apartment by 6 p.m. as planned, Kevin tried to contact her, but worryingly, her phone went straight to voicemail, likely because cell reception in the area is very poor. He immediately became concerned, as she was known to stay in contact and was a very organized person. When he still couldn't get a hold of her by 8 p.m., he decided to go to the trail to look for her, and when he arrived, it became even more worrying when he spotted her car still parked in the parking lot. He made his way up the trail but tripped and broke his flashlight, leaving him with no option but to make his way back to the car in the pitch darkness, with only his cell phone as a source of light. Sam was reported as missing, and the following day a search was started. Helicopters with infrared technology scoured the area from the sky, while volunteers searched on the ground, but in vain. Expert trackers and search dogs also failed to find any trace of Sam, and had no success. One hiker stated that he saw Sam walking in the wrong direction, but was too far away to get her attention. The search was ended after 3 weeks without any positive results, and the rumors that Kevin was involved or that she'd been abducted from the mountain persist today. But Sam's case remains unsolved, despite the family employing a private investigator after alleging that she was a victim of foul play. 49-year-old Charles Lyon of Tyler, Texas, was confirmed to be missing when his car was found abandoned and empty at the south rim of the Grand Canyon National Park. It's believed that the car was left there on or around the 11th of June, 2021, and no trace of him has been found since. The last time that Charles was seen was on the 10th of June that year at a Best Western hotel in Tucson, Arizona. It's believed that he traveled to the area alone and after walking into the wilderness, disappeared without a trace. When it became apparent that Charles hadn't returned to the hotel and no one was able to contact him by the following morning, a search effort was undertaken by the National Park Service. Volunteers and search parties looked for him on the ground, while helicopters were brought in to try and spot him from the sky. But despite all this, no sign of Charles was found. The search went on for a further 3 months without any success, and when all avenues had been pursued, it was announced that the search would only continue in limited mode. This means that investigators would keep investigating the case, but that they would be relying on information received from members of the public, rather than actively searching the areas where he may have traveled to. Physical searches would be limited to backcountry patrols and occasional helicopter flyovers, and any tips that are received will be followed up on. It isn't known whether Charles told anyone he knew of his plans that day, or what exactly those plans were. Since his car was found at the South Rim, it's been suggested that he decided to go for a hike and then got lost, never finding his way back to his vehicle. No one ever saw Charles heading into the wilderness that day, and no one reported seeing him on any of the trails, leaving searchers and investigators baffled. He's described as having brown hair that's graying slightly at the temples and brown eyes. He stands 6 foot 3 inches tall and weighs around 177 pounds. Unfortunately, it isn't known what he was wearing when he left the hotel that day, but his case remains open and is being treated as a missing person investigation. Anyone who has any information on Charles's disappearance, or who sees him, is asked to contact the NPS Investigative Services Branch tip line at 888-653-0009. Alternatively, you can submit a tip online at nps.gov/ISB, or email any information you have to nps_ISB@nps.gov. Few details are available regarding the disappearance of 68-year-old Barry Joel Tragen, who went missing in Glacier National Park in July of 2020, and his case is still being investigated, albeit in a limited manner. Barry hailed from Columbia Falls, Montana, and while sources haven't revealed whether he was in the area to do some hiking or for some other reason, his car was seen parked in the Kinta Lake area on the 22nd of July. It also hasn't been revealed whether his car was searched or whether anything was found in the areas surrounding it. But when he failed to make contact with anyone close to him by the 25th of July, it was assumed that he'd gone missing, and a search was organized. Park rangers scoured the areas that he may have traveled to, and the only clue that was found was a pair of sunglasses that were discovered in Kintla Lake. It's never been confirmed whether these were definitely Barry's sunglasses, since the reports state that they may have belonged to him. A description of Barry has since been made available. He has gray hair and hazel eyes, stands 5 foot 10 inches tall, and at the time that he went missing weighed 220 pounds. No further information has been made available as to what he was wearing when he was last seen, and further details on his case are seemingly non-existent for reasons unknown. Canine teams were brought in to aid in the search for Barry, but to no avail, as his scent was never picked up, and none of his clothing or possessions have ever been recovered. The search dogs did show some interest in the Kintla Lake outlet area, but they were unable to find anything useful. Since search efforts proved futile, investigators are now relying on tips from the public, if he's ever spotted, in hopes that he will be found have dwindled dramatically since it's now been 4 years since he was last seen. A remotely operated underwater vehicle was used to aid in the search, but it also failed to yield any positive results. Boats and helicopters were also utilized, but returned the same results with nothing being found. It's possible that Barry walked into the park that day to go for a hike and then became lost. But this is merely a theory, since it isn't known why he was in the area that day. It's also possible that he simply left his car where it was found and made his way somewhere else on foot, but this also hasn't been proven. The FBI has also assisted with the investigation, but since no leads have come in, the case has gone cold, though it remains an active investigation. Anyone who saw Barry on the day that he disappeared, or who has any information on the case, is urged to contact the Glacier National Park tip line at 406-888-7077. The case of the disappearance of 28-year-old Jessica Stacks is one that's full of twists and inconsistencies, leading many people to believe that she was a victim of foul play, but to this day she remains missing. The mystery began on New Year's Day of 2021 in Union County, Mississippi, when Jessica and her boyfriend, Jerry Baggett, contacted one of their friends to ask if they could borrow or rent their boat. They stated they were planning on launching it into the Little Tallahatchie River in order to look for deer or wild hogs that were left stranded by flooding in the area. The boat that they were using didn't have any outboard motor or any oars, and so they decided to use a shovel as a paddle to make their way across the water. Jessica, according to Jerry, had left her phone with one of her friends who they planned to contact for a ride home once they were ready to return. Once they had acquired the boat, they made their way to the Poolville Quick Stop on Highway 30, where Jerry and a woman were seen towing a boat at around 5:30 a.m. It's since been speculated that the woman in the car wasn't actually Jessica, but Jerry maintains that it was indeed her. He told investigators that they then left the gas station and traveled to a bridge on County Road 46, where they then launched the boat. After traveling about 2 miles on the river, the boat started taking on water, forcing them to make their way onto a sandbank to bail out as much of it as they could. While doing this, the couple got into an argument, and according to Jerry, he stepped back into the boat, which caused it to move further into the river. Jessica was stranded on the sandbank, but seemingly had no interest in getting back in the boat as she started walking towards Highway 30. She walked out of view, and by the time he made it back to the sandbank, she was nowhere to be found. Strangely, he then left the boat where it was and called a friend to pick him up. He never reported her as missing, and it wouldn't be until 10:15 that night that the authorities were informed that she hadn't come home. When the sandbank was searched, a woman's coat, a boot with the top cut off, a glove, and a shovel with a broken handle were found, along with a set of footprints that led about 100 yards toward Highway 30, into a flooded field where the trail went cold. When Jessica was still not found, the river was searched by police divers and the banks were scoured by police dogs, but nothing further was found. Many people have questioned Jerry's version of events, since it seemed strange that the couple would launch a boat into a swollen river with only shovels to paddle with. But investigators pointed out that they were both struggling with addiction to illegal substances, which may have impaired their thinking at the time. But Jessica's mother is adamant that her daughter would never have gone along with this plan, since she had no interest in hunting. She also maintains that she would never have left her phone with a friend, and added that the detail of her purse being found in the abandoned boat also seemed suspicious. Then, in an interview with a media outlet, Jerry stated that he was at work that day and hadn't seen Jessica. He denied having borrowed a boat or spending any time with her that day, in direct contradiction to his initial claims to the police. Since then, Jessica's case has gone cold, and no further clues have ever been found. Investigators have not revealed whether they suspect foul play, but have vowed to continue with the investigation until it's solved. On August 4th, 2016, Brad Broach's family expected him home in Allen, Texas, after a trip to Alaska. When he didn't return home, his family reported him missing. A search for Brad turned up more questions than answers, and he hasn't been seen or heard from since. Brad was a 46-year-old father of 3 who'd come to Alaska on a vacation with his daughter. By August 2nd, Brad's daughter had already flown home to Texas, but he'd chosen to stay out a little longer. He was enjoying hiking along the trails in the Girdwood area, and it was along these trails that Brad had apparently gone missing. The last confirmed sighting of the missing person was at 9:45 p.m. on August 2nd, near the Alyeska Resort Hotel in Girdwood. He'd already spent the day hiking the North Face Trail, arriving back at the resort at 9:05 p.m. In late August, this far north, there was still plenty of time before it got dark, and it seems Allen wanted to make the most of it. At 9:45 p.m., he signed the trail log at the Winter Creek trailhead. It's believed he talked briefly to some other hikers at the trailhead before embarking on the hike. At the time of Brad's disappearance, there were 2 ways forward from this point. The first was the hand tram, which was suspended 100 feet over the rushing water. Opened in 2001, it consisted of a metal cage that hikers would climb into and use a system of pulleys to draw themselves across. The hand tram was closed in 2019 after an accident led to one person losing their life and another suffering serious wounds. The area manager claimed that the hand tram had become an attraction itself and was being used more like a ride than just for crossing the trail. Brad never mentioned exactly where he intended to go, but it's possible that he wanted to check out the tram himself and used it to cross the canyon. Alternatively, there's a trail that goes down into the ravine. After the canyon, the trail continues into the Upper Winter Creek Trail, which is described as a more difficult climb into alpine country. Search and rescue teams set out into the forest to try and find any signs of the missing person. Some footprints and wrappers from cough drops were located, but it was impossible to tell whether or not these were from Brad or another hiker in the area. The weather made searching difficult as light rain came in. There was little wind, which meant that the 10-dog teams taking part in the search struggled to find a scent to try to track Brad down. For about an hour after Brad was last seen, his phone was still giving a strong signal. That stopped sometime after 10:32 p.m. It's possible the battery simply ran out, or that Brad had turned it off to try to conserve battery. Alternatively, the phone may have been damaged if it entered the water. A likely scenario is that Brad ended up either in Winter or Glacier Creek. Search teams used jet ski-like vehicles to search the water, both upstream and downstream, from the various crossing points, but found no traces of the missing person. One possibility is that he managed to climb back out of the water after falling in, but then disappeared into the wilderness. Brad was last seen wearing a light blue shirt, khaki shorts, and a dark blue baseball hat, with the words Broach Heaters. He was carrying a black or blue laptop bag. Anyone with information on this case is asked to contact the Alaska State Troopers at 907-269-5511. In May of 2006, a young couple who'd gotten lost on a day hike at Mount San Jacinto came across a camp and pack left behind by another hiker. They discovered a journal which told of events that had eerily happened exactly a year before. They also found matches and supplies that allowed them to attract rescuers. John Donovan never met Brandon Day and Gina Allen, but he managed to save their lives, and they led recovery teams to his body. John had started hiking late in life, around the age of 40, to try to get fit. From that point on, though, it had become a passion. For the next 20 years, he would spend as much time as possible traveling around the US and hiking trails. He'd completed many longer trails and sections, but the first thing he wanted to do after he retired was complete the Pacific Crest Trail. The hike would take him from Mexico in the south, all the way to the Canadian border. But unfortunately, John would never make it out of California. He was supposed to be hiking alongside a friend, but bad weather had made that friend delay starting by a few weeks. He tried to encourage John to delay too, but John was determined to start as soon as possible. John's trip started the same day he retired from his job as a social worker. Things started out well, and John was making good progress. At the end of his journey, he was hiking with a friend, but at Warner Springs, the two went their separate ways, and John headed off towards Mount San Jacinto. There was a storm due in the area in a few days, and most hikers had decided to stay in the town of Idlewild so that they didn't get trapped on the mountain in the worst of conditions. Other hikers warned John that he should probably do the same, or at least take an ice axe with him, but he didn't take the advice. He again met up with other hikers while on the mountain, who walked with him some of the way. They described John as having a hard time. He was slipping and falling over a lot and lagging a little way behind them, but he seemed determined to keep going. They were also unable to stop John from continuing. On May 3rd, John was about 8,080 feet up the mountain when he was left alone again. This was the last time anybody saw John alive, and it would be over a year before anybody found out what happened to him. At the point where John was last seen, the trail was still partially visible, but it wasn't long before whiteout conditions hit. John wrote a makeshift diary on the maps and plans he'd brought with him, describing how he couldn't find the trail to Idlewild, but he'd seen the lights of Palm Springs and was going to make his way towards them. Over the following days, John struggled to make it along the difficult terrain. He was also running low on supplies and described feeling fatigued. His last note said that he was going down to the creek for water and ended with "goodbye and love you all." Unfortunately, it wasn't until after this last message that anybody even realized John was missing. His friends had been sending him supply packages, and it was only when several of those went uncollected that John was reported as missing. Search teams went up into the mountain but found no trace of the missing man. Almost exactly a year after his last message, Brandon and Gina stumbled across John's camp in a dead-end gorge. They'd been lost in the wilderness for days after taking a wrong turn while on a hike. At first, they thought this meant that John was nearby, but they soon realized the camp had been there for a year. They found matches and were able to light signal flares, which drew search teams toward them. Once Brandon and Gina were rescued, recovery teams went to John's camp. Only about 50 yards from where Brandon and Gina had found his diary, John's body was discovered in a pool near a waterfall. A lot of missing person cases can seem relatively simple, even when the person in question hasn't been found. In the case of Eloise Lindsay, authorities believe she most likely wandered off the trail and succumbed to the elements when she went missing in November of 1989. When she was eventually found, she revealed a story much more unusual. Eloise was a 22-year-old recent graduate of Agnes Scott College who was trying to decide what she was going to do with her life next. She'd studied medicine but switched her attention to art while she was at school. There were a lot of options open to her, and she decided to take a multi-day hike through the South Carolina wilderness. According to her parents, Eloise had been interested in hiking from a young age and had gone on solo hikes before. But this was the longest solo hike she had ever planned, and her mother tried to talk her out of it, but Eloise was determined and went ahead. She was well prepared for the hike, with supplies for about a week, and training in survival techniques as well as her experience. Even though her mother was worried, it should have been a challenge that Eloise could accomplish. On November 4th, she arrived at the Foothills Trail in Table Rock State Park. She signed the logbook there with the names Eloise and George Lindsay. There was no George Lindsay, but Eloise didn't want people to know that she was out in the mountains alone. The first day of her hike, the other two hikers spotted her near the top of the Sassafras Mountain. After that, she wasn't seen or heard from for weeks. The area where Eloise planned to hike was very remote. It also took her past several treacherous areas, including multiple waterways and 2 waterfalls. In 1989 alone, there had been 3 incidents of people losing their lives at one of the falls, and it was an extremely risky place for her to venture alone. It was at one of these waterfalls where Eloise was supposed to meet up with a friend on November 11th. When there was no sign of her, she was reported as a missing person. Search and rescue teams set about trying to locate the missing woman. There were a few possible scenarios that they were exploring, but the most likely scenario was that she had some kind of accident in the wilderness. Many logging paths crossed over the trail, and searchers speculated that she may have accidentally wandered down one of them and gotten lost. Alternatively, she could have lost the path due to the falling leaves or intentionally wandered off the path for unknown reasons. But authorities couldn't rule out the possibility of foul play. Even though it hadn't happened on the Foothills Trail, there had been incidents of lone female hikers being attacked elsewhere in the country. Something like this may have happened to Eloise. Days passed with no sign of Eloise. Even though she had the training to survive in the wilderness, it seemed less and less likely that she would be found alive. Rain and snow had hit the area, and search and rescue teams had found no sign of a fire or any kind of signal. After over a week of searching, the search was called off. But on November 20th, Eloise emerged from the wilderness, just over the border into North Carolina. She was discovered by hunters at a location referred to as Muster Ground, where hunters would often gather. According to Eloise, she was slightly delirious at this point and didn't know if she could trust the hunter who had found her. Luckily, she allowed him to take her to a location where her parents were waiting. Eloise told authorities and the press that she'd been running through the wilderness for 2 weeks to escape men who were chasing her. On the 3rd day of her hike, she spotted 2 hunters with walkie-talkies and overheard them talking about her. She didn't catch exactly what they were saying, but she believed they had bad intentions. She dropped her pack and ran to try to escape. Authorities said there was no evidence that Eloise was being chased, but the fear explained Eloise's strange decisions, like not starting a fire. On June 17, 2002, Corwin Osborn was dropped off at the Devil's Lake Trailhead in Deschutes County, Oregon. He intended to climb all 3 of the Three Sisters Mountains and meet his father at the Lava Camp Lake Trailhead that evening. Corwin never made it there and has never been seen again. The Three Sisters are a series of dormant volcanoes that form part of a chain that divides Oregon from north to south. These 3 in particular are close together and relatively similar in height. They sit in the Three Sisters Wilderness area at the boundary between Lane and Deschutes County, and are a popular destination for hikers. Climbing all 3 mountains in one day is doable, but a challenge for even athletic and experienced climbers. Corwin was both athletic and experienced. He'd moved to Seattle in 1984 to pursue his interest in climbing and hiking. According to his family, he hiked quickly and liked to get to places that would normally take at least 2 days to reach. Corwin could manage up to 40 miles a day, which was roughly the distance that he would be hiking while trying to climb all 3 sisters. Despite Corwin's experience, he didn't seem to be prepared for if things went wrong, as he set off on his hike that morning. He left the Devil's Lake trailhead at 6 a.m. with enough food and water for a day out in the wilderness. He also carried a heavy-duty reflective space blanket. Even in the height of summer, it could get below freezing in the mountains. This was something Corwin was apparently prepared for. When he didn't arrive at Lava Camp, Corwin's father alerted authorities about his son's disappearance, and a search of the mountains began. At first, it was unclear whether Corwin had intended to summit one or all 3 of the sisters. It was unclear which mountain he might have tried first, and there was no way of knowing when exactly he ran into trouble. 250 volunteers took part in the search, combing over an area of 150 square miles in the week after Corwin's disappearance. A few days after the search began, a skier came forward with information. He'd been on the mountain the day that Corwin vanished, and had also seen a solo hiker on a saddle north of Middle Sister. The hiker didn't say anything to the other travelers and continued on his journey. The skier contacted authorities, but it took a while to confirm that it was actually Corwin who he had seen. The search eventually shifted north, but precious time had been spent searching in other parts of the wilderness. After a little over a week, the search was called off. In the time that Corwin had been missing, the weather had shifted to below freezing conditions, and Corwin's family accepted that it was unlikely that he was still out alive in the wilderness. Anybody with information on the case is asked to contact the Deschutes County Sheriff's Department at 541-383-4396. Not all missing person cases get the attention they need to eventually be solved. The disappearance of Glenda Shoptaugh is one with limited information, making the small pieces of information we do know even stranger. Glenda was 62 years old at the time of her disappearance and lived with her son in Oregon. She had a history of mental illness, and according to her son, she'd been acting strangely in the days leading up to when she vanished. On the morning of November 10, 2005, he heard her talking to herself, but this wasn't enough of a concern for him to stay with her that day. He had plans to go mushroom picking with a friend and left the house at 7:30 a.m. He returned 4 or 5 hours later to find both Glenda and her car were missing. For some reason, he wasn't immediately worried, and it was a few days before Glenda was reported missing. On November 15th, the day after her son reported her as a missing person, park staff located Glenda's car in Mount Hood National Forest. Mount Hood National Forest is one of the most visited national forests in the U.S. It's covered in old-growth forests that surround Mount Hood, and multiple wilderness areas make up the park. Glenda's car was a 1985 Subaru station wagon. It was discovered on a forest road roughly 4 miles from Highway 224. Reports say that the car was found covered in black mold, but it's not clear whether that was the state of the car when Glenda left on the day of her disappearance. It can take less than a day for the fungus to start to grow, but much longer for it to be visible. Even though Glenda had been missing for 5 days when her vehicle was located, it's unlikely that the fungus had grown from nothing in the time that she'd been missing. At first, the Forest Service employee who found Glenda's car didn't realize it was connected to a missing person case. It was only the following day, when they noticed it still hadn't moved, that they realized something strange had occurred. The car was connected to Glenda, and the search for the missing woman focused on that area of the forest. Unfortunately, a search of the area didn't turn up any clues. The police suspected that Glenda may never have been in the area to begin with, at least not while she was alive. It's possible that she had a mental health episode and wandered off into the forest where she succumbed to misadventure. But the police believed foul play may have been involved. There were people in Glenda's life with connections to the illegal substance trade, and it was speculated that this may have had something to do with her disappearance. But there's no evidence that this was the case, and what exactly happened to her remains a mystery. Anybody with information on Glenda's case should contact the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office at 503-557-5811. The disappearance of Reinhard Kirchner is another unsolved missing person case without much information. Reinhard disappeared while on a hike in a remote area of the Navajo Reservation wilderness in 2007, and no trace of him has ever been found. Reinhard was a German national who came to the US many times before. In early March, he arrived in Vancouver and hired a camper to travel down the Pacific coast. He planned to meet his girlfriend in Las Vegas at the end of his trip and contacted her every day. By March 20th, he'd arrived in the Little Colorado River area of Arizona. Reinhard was an experienced hiker and was in good physical condition. He'd hiked around the Colorado Plateau many times, but was looking for something a little different for this trip. The Little Colorado River Gorge is less well visited by tourists, but still has the amazing scenery of the nearby Grand Canyon, and was the perfect place for Reinhard to visit on his trip. The last contact anybody had with Reinhard was on March 20th, when he sent a normal message to his girlfriend. The following day, she was unable to get in touch with him, and grew increasingly worried as each day passed. On April 9th, Reinhard was officially overdue in Las Vegas, and his girlfriend reported him as a missing person. Even so, there were still some days before teams began to search for Reinhard, and 22 days had passed before the search had begun. It would have been extremely difficult for Reinhard to have survived in the harsh conditions of the area for that long, if he was out in the wilderness, but there is still some hope that he might be found. The same day that the search began, the rented camper was located near the rim of the Little Colorado River Gorge, about 2 miles from an area known as Hellhole Bend. This area is notorious for its sinkholes, which are especially easy to miss at night. The sinkholes are particularly dangerous and connect to an underground water system. Searching them would be extremely difficult, and searchers were only permitted to lower cameras into them to look, and no trace of Reinhard was located there. The search teams also utilized cadaver dogs and helicopters to try to search above ground. Reinhard's camper was also searched as a potential crime scene, but none of this resulted in any clues being found. Over a year later, in 2008, search teams were sent to collect evidence located by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It was believed this might be connected to Reinhard's disappearance, but the evidence led nowhere. Now, more than 15 years on, Reinhard remains missing. There were rumors of strange lights in the sky on the day that he was last seen, leading some to believe that the paranormal may have been involved in this disturbing disappearance. It's more likely that the sinkholes were to blame, but until Reinhard is found, the case will remain a mystery. The last time anybody saw Randy Charles Spring was when his mother dropped him off near a trailhead to go hiking along the Pacific Coast Trail. He was only supposed to be gone for a few days, but more than 35 years later, there's still no clues about what happened to him. In March of 1988, Randy was discharged from the military, having enlisted as soon as he was old enough. He'd previously served in South Korea and Hawaii, but was now returning home to California, where he lived with his family. He'd started working at the California Department of Forestry and was a volunteer firefighter. Randy intended to make firefighting his career and had already started training in this area. It seemed like Randy was adjusting to life as a civilian well. On October 10th of 1988, Randy asked his mother to drop him off at a trail near the San Jacinto Mountains. He'd always enjoyed hiking and camping and had plenty of survival experience from his time in the Army. Randy's mother dropped him off in the vicinity of Tipton Road and Whitewater Road in Whitewater, California at 6:30 a.m. Randy told her that he would be gone for a few days and would either hitchhike home or call them to ask for a ride. 10 days passed and Randy's parents still hadn't heard from him. They contacted the authorities to report him missing, and a search began. There are few details available about what the search entailed. Not long after the search effort began, hikers contacted authorities to say that they'd seen the missing man on the day of his disappearance. It was sometime between noon and 1 p.m. when Randy was spotted at the base of the San Jacinto Mountains. The authorities were never able to confirm for certain that this was Randy, but the sighting was considered likely. No other trace of Randy was ever found. The search teams were unable to locate any of the items that he'd brought with him, or any signs that he'd been camping in the area. There are a few possible scenarios that could explain Randy's disappearance. With so many different trails and places where Randy could have gone off trail, it would have been easy enough for him to get lost and difficult for search parties to locate him without knowing exactly where he even intended to hike. But it's also possible that Randy made it off the mountain when he disappeared. It's impossible to say when exactly Randy's journey went wrong. It's possible that he'd completed the hike and was trying to make his way home when he met with foul play. Randy had intended to hitchhike home, which had a lot of risks. There are many stories from the period of dangerous individuals picking up hitchhikers, who were then never seen alive again. If this happened to Randy, he may have been taken somewhere far from the search area before his remains were disposed of. Alternatively, Randy's mother put forward the theory that he'd never gone hiking to begin with. He'd shown her maps of the area where he intended to visit, but writing on a blog decades after he vanished, Arlene Spring expressed doubt that he'd ever gone onto the Pacific Crest Trail. If that were the case, it's a possibility Randy might have decided to just start a new life somewhere fresh. In June of 1999, Stephen Reed left the Zigzag Ranger Station in the Mount Hood National Forest with guides to 2 trails he wanted to check out. He hasn't been seen or heard from since. Stephen was 24 years old at the time of his disappearance. He was a medical student at Wayne State University in Detroit who just finished his 2nd year. Throughout his life, Stephen had excelled at school and wanted to be a doctor from a very young age. But as he progressed in his studies, he was also under a lot of pressure and was worried about not being able to get a residency. Stephen's trip to Oregon that summer had 2 purposes. He wanted to get away from the stress and spend some time by himself, but he was also hoping to meet with the performance artist named Miranda July. July's work had been an inspiration to Stephen, and he wrote multiple letters to her. The last one included a copy of his student ID, a prepaid phone card, and a message saying that he hoped they could meet up. July never spoke to Stephen and didn't meet up with him during his trip. Once he was in Portland, Stephen checked into a hostel and purchased some alcohol and tickets to a concert. 2 days after he first arrived in Portland, on June 22nd, Stephen arrived at the ranger station to start his hike around the Salmon Huckleberry Wilderness in the Mount Hood National Forest. He collected trail guides for the Ramona Falls and Salmon Butte trails and disappeared into the wilderness. On June 25th, park staff noticed that a car had been parked at the trailhead for the Salmon Butte Trail for several days. At first, they thought someone had simply been camping in the area. It wasn't until Stephen failed to return home on July 2nd that anybody realized he was missing. Stephen's father contacted authorities. He'd been aware of Stephen's plans to hike around Mount Hood and could give park staff a description of Stephen's car. The search for Stephen began around the Salmon Butte Trail. Conditions had been good for hiking on the last day that Stephen was seen, but the weather had soon turned wet. The steep drop-offs on either side of the path could have become treacherous, even if Stephen didn't intentionally leave the trail. Search and rescue teams conducted a search of the trail and the surrounding areas. It had been over a week since Stephen was last seen, meaning they had a very large area to search in this missing person case. But teams spent thousands of man-hours going through every part of the search area, and not a single piece of evidence was ever found. If found, Stephen would be 49 years old today. Stephen was 5 foot 9 inches tall and weighed 145 pounds at the time of his disappearance. Anyone with information on the case can contact the Clackamas County Sheriff's Office non-emergency line at 503-655-8211. In July of 2018, Paul Miller disappeared without a trace in the Joshua Tree National Park. His family would spend years searching for answers until his remains were finally discovered at the end of 2019. But even this has left behind some unanswered questions. Paul and his wife Stephanie had traveled from Canada to California for their 26th wedding anniversary. They'd spent their time enjoying the sights and hiked around Joshua Tree Park during their stay. Paul was an experienced outdoorsman, and on the final day of their trip, he wanted to take one last hike in the park. Stephanie had originally planned to go with them, but decided to stay behind to pack their belongings. They had traveled to Las Vegas to catch a flight back to Canada, and she didn't want to be late. At around 9 a.m. on July 13, 2018, Paul left the motel where he and Stephanie were staying and headed for the 49 Palms Oasis Trail. The trail is relatively easy, with only a moderate elevation change. It was a loop and should have taken just a few hours to complete. Paul had told Stephanie he would be back by around 11 a.m. Stephanie began to grow worried when he wasn't back by that time, but waited an extra hour, hoping that he would show up. At noon, she contacted authorities to report Paul as a missing person, and the search for him began. Paul's car was located at the trailhead, and witnesses reported seeing Paul along the trail, moving quickly and with purpose. Search teams were close to certain that he was still in the area somewhere, and began a land and air search for him. The extremely hot weather at the time made searching for Paul difficult. Thermal cameras couldn't be used, as the rocks at Joshua Tree would give off more heat than a human body. The heat also made it difficult for the dog teams to pick up a scent, and at times it was too hot for the dogs to safely work. Even in the harsh conditions, the search and rescue teams spent days searching the trail for Paul before the search had to be called off. For the next 18 months, Paul's family continued to visit Joshua Tree Park, retracing his footsteps in the hopes they might stumble across him. Other hikers sent photos of items they found along the trail in case they could lead to any clues about what happened to Paul, but none of the items belonged to him. It was only when the family received permission to fly a drone in the park that Paul was finally found. In November of 2019, the Western State Aerial Search began to search with drones around the area where Paul was last seen. Thousands of images were taken and uploaded online, where volunteers began to search through them for any clues. In December, authorities were alerted to a body that had been discovered in one of the photos. When park staff went to retrieve the body, they found he was in a shaded area, with food and water found near the remains. There was no identification with the remains, but dental records confirmed they belonged to Paul. What exactly happened to Paul remains a mystery, but the most important thing is that Paul was found, and his family could get some of the closure they needed. In March of 2016, American student Colin Madson left the cabin where he was staying with 4 friends in the Russian town of Arshan. He disappeared into the wilderness, with his body located 8 days later. The circumstances surrounding his passing remain mysterious. On the day of his disappearance, Colin was supposed to be taking part in a hiking trip to scale a mountain known as Love Peak. He was staying with a group of friends that consisted of 2 Russians and another American. The night before the trip, they stayed up late before finally heading to bed at around 2 a.m. on March 27th. The plan was for them to wake at 5 a.m. and start their hike 2 hours later. When the rest of the group woke, there was no sign of Colin. They waited until 7 a.m., but Colin still hadn't returned. Local authorities were informed, and Colin was listed as a missing person. A search of the surrounding area commenced. The weather was hovering around freezing, and rain and sleet made the search difficult. Colin's mother flew over from the United States to try to get some answers, but allegedly met with hostility by the Russian authorities. They questioned Colin's lifestyle, seeming to imply that he'd gotten himself in trouble due to his sexuality. They also theorized that Colin and his friends had been drinking the night before his disappearance, but the group insisted they were all sober. After 8 days, Colin's body was found. He was lying beneath a tree in an area not covered by snow. Colin lay on his back with one arm outstretched and his hand in a fist. The spot where he was found was located just outside the initial search area, 1.5 kilometers away from the village where he'd been staying. There were some discrepancies about the state he was found in. According to authorities, he was wearing a simple t-shirt, but a crime scene photo allegedly showed him wearing a thermal shirt, which should have kept him warm. He was also wearing untied boots and no socks. It would have been difficult for him to have traveled that far in such a condition at night. Authorities in Russia conducted an autopsy and concluded that Colin had passed away due to hypothermia. He left his friends at some point before dawn for unknown reasons and began to walk. But there are several problems with this theory. As well as it being difficult to walk that far in the state Colin was in, his body wasn't found in a position where most victims of hypothermia are found. Experts also pointed out that the stiffness of his body when he was found indicated that he had not been there for 8 days, and they believed this was not the location where he passed away. Colin's family believe foul play was responsible for his disappearance, but Russian authorities have not reopened the case, and the US government has no authority to do so themselves. For now, the truth about what happened to Colin remains a mystery. The Caribou-Targhee National Forest stretches across 3 million acres in the southeastern area of Idaho. Visitors can camp, hike, fish, and hunt, as well as kayak and ski. While this national forest is home to magnificent spring flowers and a choir of chirping birds, it also holds a few mysteries, one of which is the disappearance of Christopher Lynn Holverson. Chris graduated from Skyline High School in 1997 and had been working at a local restaurant in 1998. There are a few different versions of this story, but all of them end the same. Chris was nowhere to be found. It all started on the evening of the 17th of May in 1998 when he and several friends, consisting of 7 people around his age and 1 adult, were camping in the Targhee National Forest. They settled in at Table Rock Campground, located close to Kelly Canyon Ski Resort. It's a quiet ground of a grassy meadow decorated with wildflowers. Surrounding it are towering pines and aspen trees. If you're looking for a way to make some extra pocket money, TesterUp has a great opportunity for you. TesterUp lets you earn money as an online tester whenever and wherever you want. You can use a smartphone, tablet, or even a computer. TesterUp is the largest platform in the entire country of Germany for paid online jobs, totaling more than 2.9 million online testers. To get started, you don't have to pay anything, and registration is 100% free. After signing up, you'll instantly receive access to all sorts of online surveys and product tests. You can earn as much as $850 directly after downloading the app, and you can choose from an assortment of app tests, website demos, and even product tests. You can earn your first payout through PayPal with as little as $70, earning up to $80 per job, and payouts are fast and secure, getting money to you in as little as 24 hours. More than 50 tasks are available for you immediately after registration. You can even upgrade to become a premium tester, giving you higher payments and more assignments. TesterUp is tested, verified, and recommended with great ratings from Trustpilot. They value authenticity and trustworthiness, so what are you waiting for? Give TesterUp a try by using the link in the description. Thanks to TesterUp for sponsoring today's video. Chris had left his vehicle, a Chevy pickup, at one of his friends' houses. The weather that night began to worsen. Snow covered the grounds and sleet began to fall. This particular area is a well-used one, and wildlife is known to not descend upon the visitors. During the trip, the friends had a party, and he would leave the tent sometime between 9:30 and midnight. The others claimed that he had tripped over a rope while exiting, and everyone teased him about it. The campers don't entirely agree on a conflicting aspect. Some have said that Chris had gotten into a fight with one or more individuals who accompanied him that evening. Others have said that he just left without fighting or engaging with anyone. Chris walked off in an unspecified direction, which was characteristic of him, as it was reported that he often took off unannounced but always returned. Except this time, the man didn't come back from his trip. He never collected the Chevy from his friend, and he didn't have any of his other belongings with him at the time. It was revealed that Chris's parents were separating, but he didn't seem upset enough by the whole ordeal to run away. There's only one credible sighting of the missing man, which came from the driver at the camp, who stated that he saw a person matching the description standing by a vehicle. He reported seeing a tall man wearing a blue tracksuit with a white stripe, but this sighting has remained unconfirmed. There's since been no new evidence that's come up for the last 26 years. There exist 2 different theories about this case. One of them paints the picture that after walking off, Chris succumbed to the elements. The weather had been rough and he was wearing a light jacket. He didn't have a flashlight on him, but wildlife encounters were rare, and according to the locals and regular campers, it was extremely difficult to get lost in the open wooded area. The second theory is a bit more sinister, yet it remains nothing more than a suggestion. Something happened that night that the group had kept a secret, according to the theory. The campers had told the same story upon investigation, but in the years that followed it seemed to evolve. Allegations have been made about sketchy behavior taking place at the party, and the days that came after the initial disappearance. No one has made an allegation that anyone had taken the man's life, but rumors still run unchecked. There's said to have been some Facebook groups dedicated to Chris, where family and friends of those who camped with him that night might have gotten into back and forth disagreements. Allegations have been thrown around on this group, one of which stated that the stepfather of one of the teenagers had threatened them into silence. That same stepfather had information that he wanted to bring forth, but passed away before he was ever able to do so. These allegations remain exactly that, an allegation, none of which have been proven. At the time of his disappearance, Chris Lynn Holverson was 6 feet and 2 inches tall. He weighed somewhere around 155 pounds and wore a blue jacket with a white stripe on one side. He's described as a brown-haired male with brown eyes and wears eyeglasses. Should anyone have any information regarding the missing man, you're encouraged to contact the Madison County Sheriff's Office at 208-356-5426. He would now be the age of 45 years old. Number 9. Located in New Mexico is a national park home to many mysteries. The Santa Fe National Forest is made up of 1.6 million acres of valleys, mountains, and mesas that range to elevations of 5,000 to 13,000 feet. Back in 2017, something strange started happening. For several months, an increasing number of man-made structures began to appear. They were made of downed wood and appeared to be intricately designed, resembling something of a teepee. No one would be able to inhabit these structures, as the inside space was far too small, and whoever was making them needed to be caught. Some of these structures were made using 1,000 pieces and stood 2 to 3 stories tall. Forest officials have found at least 8 such structures littered across the park. So, in other words, the Santa Fe National Forest is a pretty weird place that holds some secrets that are yet to be uncovered. But one of the most prominent ones is the case of Melvin Nadell. It was the 6th of September 2009 when Mel went bow hunting with 2 friends. They were in the Elk Mountain area of the forest close to Pecos, New Mexico. With him, he had a .44 caliber revolver, camouflage print Martin bow, and zebra-striped arrows. He'd been wearing camouflage jackets and had polypropylene underclothes, thermal socks, boots, a Lucky 13 pendant, and a Seiko watch. At 4:30 p.m. that day, Mel strayed from the campsite but told his friends that he wouldn't be going far and would be back before nightfall. Unfortunately, he wasn't back before nightfall. In fact, he didn't come back at all. He was gone. A lengthy investigation into his disappearance commenced. The Jeep Cherokee belonging to Mel was found at the campsite with the number plate HKJ664. Inside it was his backpack, cell phone, and GPS unit. This appeared unusual to his hunting companion because he would always carry the GPS with him so that he wouldn't get lost in the vast landscapes. Canine units were able to pick up the scent of the missing man 50 yards from the camp, down a route that he used regularly. According to the family, he'd become lost once before, and after that incident, he never strayed too far from the site again. He had no health complications, and there were no clues pointing to foul play. Mel was declared lost or injured in the wilderness. Alan Pacheco had been searching for missing individuals since 1973. People have vanished into thin air in New Mexico, leaving search teams stumped. The same man had taken the time to investigate Melvin Nadell's disappearance. One of the areas he'd searched was the Pecos Elk Mountain area, after an amateur psychic said something didn't feel right in this part. This is where things get stranger. As mentioned previously, the forest is home to peculiarities and secrets that remain hidden. While investigating the area, Alan made use of a Geiger counter around an old fire pit. Some readings turned up on the device, but it failed. After he left the immediate area, the equipment suddenly started working again. The idea was to determine if there had been a doorway, or as described in the report, a portal had been opened in the area of the Pecos Triangle. The Pecos Triangle is yet another mystery that this forest holds. It's the phenomenon where people have a strange habit of disappearing in a similar fashion. Many have reported seeing UFOs, strange lights, ghosts, disembodied voices, and even odd human creatures. At the time of his disappearance, Mel was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. He had dark black hair and brown eyes and was said to have a wrapped knee after sustaining an injury prior to his trip. Should anyone have any information regarding this missing person, you're asked to speak to the New Mexico State Police using the number 505-827-9300. Mel's case is an active and unsolved case of missing persons. Number 8. The Mark Twain National Forest is said to be the domain of hellhounds and other demonic creatures. It's also thought to be concealing the treasures of long-lost civilizations, which points to the park's importance as a locus of dark and demonic energies. The forest encompasses 1.5 million acres of public land, spanning 29 counties in Missouri. There are 750 miles of hiking, horse riding, and mountain biking trails. Parts of the Ozark Trail wind through the forest, and more than 350 miles of perennial streams are used for kayaking. This national park offers a variety of campgrounds, giving visitors a beautiful forest experience in a semi-primitive wilderness, not to mention the possibility of an enigmatic disappearance or two. Robert Garmin was one such person who became lost in this expansive reserve. While the details surrounding the incident are plentiful and conflicting, there isn't much known about the man himself. Robert was born in 1962, making him 62 years old today, and 33 years old at the time of his disappearance. In September of that year, he and a female friend from Hot Springs, Arkansas, journeyed to the Ozarks to visit a few friends. They would ultimately end up at a party with 15 other individuals in the Mark Twain Forest close to Chadwick. This particular party was referred to as a binge party, one that lasted for several days. According to a few witnesses, Robert had been seen arguing with another male and a female acquaintance. After this, he and his friend left the event. They'd been seen walking into a Cobb Ridge campground on the 24th of September, and he was never seen again. 2 days after the two individuals were reported missing, riders on horseback had found the female companion. She was bruised and disoriented and spoke of an attack that left Robert critically wounded. The woman had no knowledge of who attacked them, nor did the other 15 guests that attended. Additionally, Robert lived 4.5 hours away, which makes it seem odd for him to travel that far to attend a party. He was also found to be using an alias from time to time, Strad Dighton, the same name that's shared with the man from Iowa who passed away in 2010. Adding to the weirdness of this case is that no one knows who reported the two missing, but someone did. The last confirmed sighting of the man was when he and his companion had gone into the woods. This case is an incredibly strange one, as there's not much to go on in terms of physical evidence. The woman was interviewed by authorities, which is where the story had come from, but it's just her word. There's no physical evidence to suggest anything, no DNA and no fingerprints. The site also sees a lot of visitors. Someone was bound to come across him at some point, but no one did. At the time of his disappearance, Robert C. Garmin was 33 years old. He had brown hair and blue eyes. He stood at a height of 5 feet 11 inches and weighed 150 pounds. He's said to have various tattoos on his chest, arms, and back. Anyone who has any information on the whereabouts of this missing man is encouraged to contact the Christian County Sheriff's Department at 1-417-581-1519 or the Missouri State Highway Patrol Missing Person Clearinghouse at 1-800-877-3452. Number 7. The Klamath National Forest and Butte Valley National Grassland stretch over an immense 1.7 million acres in the northern part of California and the southern area of Oregon. The forest is made up of the Klamath National Wild and Scenic River, along with several wilderness, geological, and botanical parts. The forest harbors elevations that reach 9,000 feet above sea level and is one of the most biologically diverse regions in America. 200 miles of river systems are adequate for rafting. This national forest is also one where quite a few disappearances have occurred and is home to other mysteries. Part of the wooded area falls in Siskiyou County, where there are many unsolved disappearances. This disappearance, though, centers around a particular woman, Marie Louise Andrew. On the 20th of August, 1987, Marie left Davis, California in an upset state. She'd been in an argument of an unknown nature. She wore a tan jacket or sweater, blue jeans, and yellow earrings with a white stone at the time that she left. It's said that she officially disappeared on the 20th of August, the day she left, but it wasn't until the 5th of September that she was officially reported missing. It was on this day that her car was found abandoned on a forest road in the Beaver Creek region of the Klamath National Forest. This area falls in Siskiyou County. The Fish and Game officer who discovered the vehicle called Marie's family to inform them. It was after this that they would go on to make a report. Local law enforcement claimed they'd seen her car as early as the 20th of August. Another sighting came from a Klamath River area store owner who saw her at the store around the same time. This witness stated that Marie had asked him about local campgrounds, and so an extensive search would ensue. They scoured surrounding areas, but there were no signs of the missing 37-year-old. Her case is considered to be one of the suspicious circumstances, and a few questions have been left unanswered. Who was the argument with? Did they follow her? And where did she go? It's also not been determined if cadaver dogs were used to pick up on her scent. It's also not been said if she went to any of the recommended campgrounds that she asked the store owner about. There exists very little information regarding her case, but there are a few things known about the missing woman herself. Marie was born in 1950, making her 74 years old this year. At the time she disappeared, she was 5 foot 4 inches tall and weighed 130 pounds. She's said to have had brown hair and blue eyes and has a chipped front tooth. Her shoe size is 7, and her pants were a 29-inch waistline. Her case remains active and is under investigation by the Siskiyou County Sheriff's Department, which can be contacted at 530-841-2900. Marie had no known medical conditions at the time she went missing, but it's noted that she was quite upset at the time. Number 6. The town of Silver Plume, also referred to as a living ghost town, can be found in Clear Creek County, Colorado. It was used as a silver mining camp that stretched along Clear Creek in the Front Range of the Rocky Mountains. The federally designated area of the Georgetown Silver Plume National Historic District consists of Silver Plume, Georgetown, and the Georgetown Loop Historic Mining and Railroad Park. It's also the town of mystery, where 2 people disappear with a strange connection to one another. To embark on this missing person case, we have to go back to the 7th of September in 1987. It was on this day that Tom Young, a bookstore owner, had vanished along with his dog, Gus. He told everyone that he was going on vacation to Europe, but when 3 weeks had gone by, his absence became suspicious. 10 months later, on the 31st of July in 1988, 2 hunters were hiking on Republican Mountain, just outside of Silver Plume, when they found the remains of Tom and Gus. The circumstances surrounding their passings were strange, but were ultimately closed by the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office. This case, though, is about Keith Richard, who 9 months after Tom's disappearance, had moved into the bookshop and opened an antique store. For 23 years, Keith was a sports reporter for a Chicago newspaper. He learned of the disappearance of the former inhabitant and quickly grew obsessed with the case. He began asking everyone around town about the disappearance and more information about Tom, and would even base a character in his novel on the mysterious disappearance. His daughter, Tiffany, noted that authors like to live the story of their characters, and this is precisely what happened with Keith. 1 week after Tom and Gus were discovered by the hunters, the antique shop owner would close up at 2:30 that afternoon. He began to walk around town, telling everyone that he would be hiking through to the nearby Pendleton Mountain, which he would then climb to the very top of. At 4 p.m., he stopped by Ted Parker, who ran a cafe right across from him, and with whom Keith had been acquainted for 40 years. He told Ted that he would be embarking on this journey, but he didn't take him seriously. But the missing man would be last seen heading toward the Pendleton Mountain. There are 2 trails that can be used to get to the 7,605-foot mountain located in the Denali National Park and Preserve. One way is to walk from the parking area on Guanella Pass Road. Hikers would need to follow the old mining roads up to a ridge trail at the bottom of Leavenworth Mountain. The walk goes right through a forested area until reaching the alpine tundra. Another way would be walking up Leavenworth Creek Road to a drainage point, making a few turns, and then heading north until reaching the summit. To reach the top of Mount Pendleton takes no less than 6 hours. This is why Ted hadn't taken his friend seriously. It was much too late to hike up such a mountain, and he was only wearing a flannel shirt with no jacket, jeans, and tennis shoes. He had no supplies and no GPS. That evening, Keith never returned. The next day, helicopters would circle Pendleton Mountain in search of the missing man. 125 men and trained dogs combed the terrain for several days, but it proved futile. No clues were unearthed as to where the man may have disappeared to. He was just gone. In their 30 years of operation, the Colorado Alpine Rescuers found every missing person every single time. Keith's friends had found his unfinished novel still open on his computer, with the last words being, quote, "Guy Gypsum changed into some hiking boots and donned a heavy flannel shirt." He ended with, he understood Tom now and his motivation. Guy closed the door, then walked off toward the lush, shadowless Colorado forest above. Keith was last seen on the 7th of August in 1988. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 210 pounds. He had blue eyes and gray hair at the time. If anyone has any information regarding the whereabouts of this missing individual, they're asked to contact the Clear Creek County Sheriff at 303-679-2354. Number 5. America's Everglades National Park is the largest subtropical wilderness in the U.S. It's the habitat of various rare and endangered animals like the manatee, American crocodile, bull sharks, and the Florida panther. There have been over 200 homicide cases since 1965, of which these animals have been used as accomplices. This national park has been subject to investigations by the FBI. It comes as no surprise that many would become lost here, as the park stretches across 1.5 million acres of southern Florida. On the 5th of March in 2011, Roger Sawyer, a 67-year-old from Oregon who was working as a butcher, accompanied his family to this national park during a cross-country trip in their mobile home. He was said to be an experienced outdoorsman, but he disappeared mysteriously while camping in the Flamingo campground. On this day, the family had gone to the visitor center, but Roger and his wife stayed behind, but were in two different areas of the grounds. Darkness began to fall, and soon everyone started making their way back to the motorhome. All except Roger. A lengthy search began, but not a hat or shoe was ever found. The Miami-Dade Fire Rescue searched the waters and beaches, but to no avail. At first, the National Park Service helped the team and provided necessary information to them, but as the search pressed on, information began to dry up. Strangely, a spokesperson for the Everglades stated that the family was unwilling to provide a picture of the missing man, a claim that they would say was entirely untrue. He was last seen at around 6 p.m. that day, and a missing person report was made at 8:30 that evening. Roger Kenneth Sawyer was 6 feet tall and weighed 170 pounds at the time of his disappearance. He has gray hair, blue eyes, and a shaven face. He was last seen wearing khaki shorts, a green sleeveless t-shirt, a ball cap, and Crocs. He uses reading glasses, which are often kept in his pocket and not worn. On his left ring finger, he adorns a gold wedding ring. According to NamUs, there's a possibility that the man was abducted. There's a Facebook page dedicated to finding Roger called Roger Sawyer Fantastic Fisherman, with the earliest post made in 2022. The page has only added to the mystery. One of the family members has made an allegation, highlighting that there'd been an argument between Roger and his wife prior to the Everglades trip. The family members believe that no one just disappears without a trace, and that they will get to the bottom of it. Should anyone have any information on Roger's whereabouts, they're asked to contact the National Park Service. Additionally, the Park Service is looking into how information was disseminated during the search. Crime Stoppers can be contacted at 305-471-TIPS or 1-866-471-8477. Alternatively, you can visit the website at crimestoppersmiami.com and select the Submit a Tip option. Number 4. Found in the heart of north-central Idaho is the beautiful, diverse land of the Nez Perce Clearwater National Forest, which spans across 4 million acres. The land ranges from the dry canyons of the Salmon River to the moist cedar forests of the Selway drainage. The park provides breathtaking scenery, adventurous wilderness, fisheries, wildlife, and pristine water quality. The forest encompasses the homelands of the Nez Perce Native Americans. It was here that 62-year-old retired state police captain Ronald S. Gray embarked on an elk hunting trip with at least one other from his hometown, North Brookfield. When the trip was nearing its end, Ronald opted to stay for a few more days to hunt by himself, which was something he had done before. Those closest to him were hopeful that he would be found safe since he survived a brutal attack back in Vietnam, but he's been missing since the 23rd of September 2008. After a few days of hunting alone, he was supposed to meet up with the rest of his companions at Otter Butte in the Selway area of the forest, but he never arrived. There does exist an unconfirmed report that a radio transmission was received by the missing man, who said he'd hurt his knee and was trying to make it back to camp. The date of the transmission is not known, and there's also no telephone service in the area. Ronald is believed to have had more than one GPS unit on him at the time of his disappearance, so getting lost was probably not the case here. It wasn't until 3 days later that the retired captain was officially reported missing. His last known area was the Bitterroot Selway, a part of a remote camp on Mirror Lake Ridge. The county sheriff's department, with the assistance of the Hillcrest Aviation and the Idaho Army National Guard, searched the grounds and air for 5 days but found nothing. A group of trained volunteers also helped in searching for Ronald on foot, horseback, and ATV. Some of the searchers had been camped out in the area and kept a campfire going all night, hoping that the missing man could find his way to them. During the efforts, a Black Hawk helicopter was also used. Searches spanned over 5,200 square miles. Deputy Nita stated that when he spoke to the last person who had seen him, Ronald allegedly said to him, "Tell everybody not to worry about me. I'll walk out when I'm ready." Friends and family were hoping that he was somewhere in the forest, having the time of his life. It's been years since the disappearance, and the missing man still hasn't resurfaced. It was also noted that he has extensive survival training, and there's even been evidence that someone has been using the food that's been stashed by hunters, but no one knows who may have done so. But even though Ronald has the equipment to make a fire, there's been no smoke signals, which they know he would have done if he'd wanted to signal for help. The retired captain also goes by the name of Ron or Ronnie. He's said to have a scar on his left leg, on both hands, and on both feet. He's also said to be missing a middle finger on his left hand. Ronald has gray hair, brown eyes, and a shoe size of 9. At the time of his disappearance, he was 5 foot 10 inches tall and weighed around 200 pounds. If anyone has any information regarding the whereabouts of this missing man, you're encouraged to contact the Idaho County Sheriff's Office at 208-983-1100. The missing man would now be the age of 78 years old. Number 3. As mentioned, the Everglades National Park is subject to many mysteries, cold case homicides, and mysterious disappearances. Adding to the list of Everglades missing person cases, along with Robert Sawyer, is Jacob Olivier. Jacob was just 23 years old when he disappeared on the 24th of August in 2011. He lived in Texas where he grew up with his father. There were reports saying that he'd been in Effingham County just 2 weeks prior to his disappearance. It's also noted that he briefly lived in Pooler, where he had some friends. His parents didn't know that he was in Florida until 6 days after his disappearance. On the 30th of August, park rangers of Everglades National Park saw a green Isuzu pickup that hadn't moved in a few days. It had been in a parking lot close to Pine Glades Lake, the park's entrance. Inside the truck, a receipt was found that showed he'd driven to the Everglades on the 24th. Jacob had no known associates in Florida, so why would he travel there? Laurie Broussard, the mother of the missing man, initially thought that her son was staging his own disappearance. She believed that the motive for this would be to avoid taking responsibility for a child that he may have been the father of. This belief, though, was abandoned when her son failed to return in the months that followed. Laurie suggests that it was uncharacteristic of Jacob to go that long without contacting her. Special Agent David Majewski, who's with the Department of Interior National Park Service, was on the case of this disappearance. He'd gone back to the lake to comb the area for any clues or evidence, but there was absolutely nothing there, just an empty pond. Strangely, there have been no sightings either. Not much is known about Jacob's movements that day or why he was heading to the national forest, but his behavior had certainly been strange in those days. There have since been no confirmed sightings or any information as to his whereabouts, but it's said that he could be in the Savannah, Georgia area. The circumstances surrounding Jacob's disappearance are unclear and are definitely mysterious. At the time, he was a height of 5 feet 3 inches and weighed 130 pounds. He's said to have black hair and green eyes. When he went missing, Jacob's hair was in a mohawk style, and his ears were double pierced. The vehicle that was found belonging to him had the Texas license plate number ADG 3707. Should anyone have any information about this missing individual and where he may be, you're asked to make contact with the Everglades National Park Service at 305-242-7740. Jacob also went by the name Jake and will be 36 years old this year. Number 2. The Tillamook State Forest is one of the smallest national parks mentioned today. It stretches across 364,000 acres in the state of Oregon. It's in this forest that people have reported seeing a strange being, referred to simply as the Tillamook creature. It's said to be 8 feet tall and takes on a humanoid appearance, something of Sasquatch origins. Footprints have been found in the forest of this elusive creature, and many journey to these forests for Bigfoot expeditions. It was in this national forest that Jeremy Ivan Childress would go elk hunting. On the 15th of October in 2004, Jeremy, an experienced hunter, left home to go on an elk hunting trip with Shane Louie and his son. He carried a rifle, a wallet, car keys, and a pack of cigarettes, and a sharpened blade along with them. At 4:30 that afternoon, he was spotted at Tuka Creek Road and Boundary Road within the Tillamook National Forest. After this sighting, Jeremy would disappear. While in the wooded area, he becomes separated from his companions after they'd become lost while trying to locate their camp. He decided to take off by himself, believing that he would be able to find the camp, but when the others made it to the rendezvous point, Jeremy would never arrive. His overnight equipment had also been left back at the site, fueling the urgency to find him. Louis would tell officials that they spent 2 whole days searching for their own campsite, but one of them became lost in the thick brush. Soon, an extensive search was carried out, but no clues surfaced. It was indicated that the area where he vanished was composed of steep and rugged terrain that had many gullies and was populated with many wild animals. There's been no evidence to suggest foul play, and it's widely believed that he'd become injured and lost somewhere in the wilderness. At the time he went missing, Jeremy was 31 years old. He was 5 feet 8 inches tall and weighed 175 pounds. His hair was brunette and his eyes were brown. The missing man had a phoenix tattoo on his left shoulder, a dolphin on his right shoulder blade, and a piercing in his left ear. He's said to have had 2 crooked front teeth and had previously fractured fingers on his right hand. At the time, he was wearing a dark brown Carhartt jacket, stone-washed Levi jeans, brown Copeland hiking shoes, and a blue Nike cap, which had the Nike logo in blue. He also wore a gold wedding band adorned with 5 diamonds and a citizen watch with EcoDrive. The investigative agency is the Tillamook County Sheriff's Office, which can be reached at 503-815-3352, with the case number 2004-14591. Jeremy would now be the age of 51. Number 1. Olympic National Park encompasses 922,651 acres of diversity. It has 3 different ecosystems, including rugged glacier-capped mountains, a Pacific coast, and an old-growth temperate rainforest. It's also the home of many twisted mysteries, ranging from disappearances to the paranormal. It's the place of UFO sightings and strange unexplained lights that move through the Hoh rainforest's trees. It has seen the vanishing of whole families and the enigmatic passings of others. These disappearances have not ceased, and there's one as early as 2022. Laura Mack was heading to the National Forest with the intention of hiking the Enchanted Valley. The wilderness permit that she was issued stated that she would be camping at the Pyrites Creek and exiting the back country a day later. She then indicated that she would be staying a bit longer and later checked in with her boyfriend. Laura failed to do this, and her car was later noticed at the Graves Creek trailhead. She then indicated that she would be staying a bit longer and would later check in with her boyfriend, but Laura failed to ever do this, and her car was noticed at the Graves Creek trailhead. She was officially declared missing on the 2nd of November. Her hike began on the 30th of October, when a significant rainstorm was recorded. Once the weather had cleared up, a volunteer search team began to search for the missing woman. Laura remained missing even with the 19 agencies on board with the search effort. Canine units were brought in along with air and marine operations, but to no avail. She was 35 years old at the time and would now be 37. The missing hiker is said to have had brown hair and brown eyes and wears glasses. A distinctive physical feature is the mole on her back above her belt line. Laura was wearing a black and white shirt and carrying with her a gray backpack and emergency whistle. She wore size 8 boots and a safari hat. The Olympic National Park can be contacted at 360-565-3115 with the case number NP22339916. These missing cases don't end here either. Just among the many are the unsolved disappearances of the 1988 case of Michael Osterhold, the 2017 case of Jacob Gray, the vanishing of Laurie Broussard in 2015, and the 2007 disappearance of Christopher Kurz. These unsolved disappearances and other Olympic National Park mysteries have been the source of intrigue among visitors and the public. The park's vast landscape and unpredictability remind visitors and the public of the importance of being prepared and staying safe during hiking trips and explorations. Some have accredited the disappearances to UFOs, strange lights, or the creatures that lurk inside. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.